Welcome to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 I'm Debra Sloss, producer and host, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. My pronouns are she, her. Today, we'll be discussing how motherhood is often shaped by powerful cultural expectations of the good mother. Patient, selfless, calm, grateful, and of course always emotionally available. When mothers internalize those impossible standards, the real struggles of motherhood can start to feel like personal failure. In this conversation, we'll bring an internal family systems, or IFS, lens to motherhood. IFS can help us understand that the harsh internal voices many mothers experience, voices of shame, guilt, anger, fear, or self-criticism, are not the whole of who they are. They are parts of them that often develop in response to unrealistic expectations, painful experiences, and the pressure to be a good mother. We'll explore how mothers can relate to these parts with more curiosity and compassion, creating a more grounded experience of motherhood. Joining us today is Jessica Tomich Sorci, a licensed marriage and family therapist, perinatal mental health certified clinician, Level 3 IFS certified therapist, and creator of the Mom Parts Method, a specialized application of IFS for maternal mental health. Jessica is the author of When Good Moms Feel Bad and has spent more than 15 years helping mothers understand that all their parts, even the scary ones, make sense. Also joining us are Reis and Karen McWilliam, who have both participated in Jessica's Mom Parts groups. They're here to share what it's been like to recognize, understand, and begin to befriend the mom parts that have shown up in their own motherhood journeys. Reis is a therapist, wife, and mother of two who brings both professional expertise and lived experience to conversations about motherhood and neurodivergence. As a neurodivergent woman raising a neurodivergent child, Amber understands the shame, self-doubt, isolation, and second-guessing that can arise when a family does not fit typical expectations. Karen McWilliam also brings lived experience and professional insight to this conversation. As a mother of two, Karen has navigated postpartum depression, rage, complex trauma, and shame. She is also an internal family systems practitioner and a perinatal mental health, birth trauma, and grief practitioner who has supported birthing and postpartum families for more than 20 years. Welcome to State of Mind, Jessica, Amber, and Karen.
So excited to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, glad that we're here. I'm happy to have this conversation with everybody.
I'm really grateful to be here as well and to have this conversation about this incredibly important topic.
I'm so glad we're all here together, too. Jessica, I want to start with you. We're here to explore this concept that's all too common for mothers, the feeling of not being enough. From your clinical work and writing your book, why do you think so many moms feel bad so much of the time?
Well, I think there are massive pressures and expectations that come from our culture, our Western culture, around how mom should be performing, what motherhood should look and feel like. And those messages definitely get absorbed and internalized. And then on top of that, there's the reality of motherhood. If you're a birthing parent, it's a depleting experience to go through pregnancy and birth and maybe breastfeeding and then sleeplessness, which is true for all parents. So you're kind of working with a depleted system to begin with, and you've got those sort of perfectionistic images that are coming through your phone all the time of how motherhood's supposed to look and feel. And we don't get enough support either in this culture. We don't get the kind of care and support that we need to be tuned into a baby, to recover from the experience of birth and pregnancy and care, 24/7 care. So we're kind of on our own. We're on our own doing a gargantuan job. It's not looking or feeling the way we think it should. And we're working with a physical system that's been depleted.
And so many mothers are having their children far from their families too, so they don't have that sort of wraparound of extended family either.
That's right. We all seem to be doing it alone, sadly, and feeling like we're the only ones that are struggling and kind of piling a sense of shame on top of the loneliness and the all the other stuff I already mentioned.
So, how do external expectations, like the myth of the endlessly patient, selfless, grateful mother, become internal voices that tell mothers they're not enough?
Well, I could answer that from a few different perspectives. I think the way that our minds work when we're growing up, we need to stay safe with the people who are taking care of us. And if the people who are taking care of us have particular ideas about what goodness looks like and what success looks like and how we should be, it's in our best interest to internalize that and to take that in and to take it very seriously and then to adapt to try to hit those marks. And even if we fail at it, even if we're not, our parents or our coaches or our teachers' idea of a successful child, we still really take that in very deeply about who we're supposed to be. And I call that an inner critic. I call that a part of us that's, got a role of picking at us and telling us all the ways we're not measuring up. And we continue throughout our lives with that inner critic that's here to remind us of the best way to survive our childhood. Most of us don't update that inner critic. We don't get an opportunity to pause and turn around and look at it and realize it's quite outdated and tuned to childhood and to an era when we were powerless. So it just persists and it continues to tell us all the ways that we're not quite as good as we should be.
Yeah, that's a perfect lead-in because I wanted to ask you more. If you could explain this idea of mom parts that you developed in your writing and your book in simple everyday language, and how can seeing things through this kind of parts lens be helpful for moms?
Yeah, all people have parts, not just moms. I happen to talk about mom parts because I work with moms, and I think it's important to create, yeah, a language and a way of understanding the experience of mothers because mothers are the most important people on earth, and they don't get a lot of care and attention. They are really asked to do an incredible amount and to do it really well, but they don't get a lot of care and attention for themselves. So I created this perspective that's really tuned to motherhood. And I wanted to say it's really for everyone too, that we all have parts. Parts are like that inner critic that forms in response to our environment and whatever we're needing to do and to kind of how we need to rearrange ourselves in order to survive and thrive in our childhood. And for many of us, there are suboptimal sort of situations that require us to contort and push back aspects of ourselves that are not well received by our parents or coaches or teachers or clergy. And in the pushing back of those parts of ourselves, we kind of have to push forward other parts that do the job of managing our facade or getting things done that need to get done. We call those manager parts in IFS, in internal family systems. So there's this sort of reconfiguration of our natural qualities and resources that every human has, depending on the context that we're in, and maybe depending on our biology too, our ever-changing biology. As women, our biology changes a lot through our lifetimes. In motherhood, those energies and qualities that are natural to us have a big reconfiguration. Certain things have to come forward to protect a helpless, nonverbal creature that we're now tasked with keeping alive. And, because of really in a perfectionistic culture, we're not only keeping it alive, we want it to be the best, the best that it can be. We want it to get
At everything.
at everything. It's got to look the
Yeah.
best, perform the best, be polite, impress people. I don't know. There's a long list. And so we have parts of us that come to the fore to help that happen. There are parts that pay a lot of attention to ways that we need to fix things or take care of things or that we feel responsible for. lots of energy that moves forward to do that. That's very much dedicated to the child. It's not very interested in how it's, impacting us or depleting us. It's just child-centered parts of us that are those mom parts that I've kind of named, like fixer, caretaker, responsible part. Who else is in there?
The mama bear, when you talk about that protection.
Yes. Yeah, all those very protective of our kids, really interested in our kids' well-being. But because that's so lopsided and it's so focused outside on results and on appearance, it tends to really be a setup for moms getting further neglected, depleted, running dry, reaching a breaking point. In that sort of lopsidedness, some other parts will show up, parts of us that are here to protect our own kind of sense of self or autonomy or self-respect, different things like that. And those parts are what IFS calls firefighters, what I call team what about mom parts, or sometimes we colloquially call them bad mom parts because our system and our culture doesn't take kindly to moms that are full of rage or that have suicidal feelings or get depressed. But those parts are real and they're here to sort of try to balance out a system that has really tipped unfairly in the estimation of the mom internally to the child and wants to grab some resources back. So, it sounds really complicated, but it's how all humans work. We're really trying to do what we need to do to survive. And then we've got sort of a set of parts that show up to clean up or to give us some soothing or relief when we've just really maxed out, feeling overwhelmed or like we're out of steam. And those parts can also look like scrolling endlessly on our phones, eating a lot of ice cream, drinking a fourth glass of wine, different ways that we soothe ourselves or get a little bit of distance and separation from all the hardcore momming that we've been doing.
Yeah, I know when I was raising my kids, I felt a lot of shame about the impulse to run away sometimes. It was so overwhelming. Yeah.
So natural too, when you're all in 24/7 and you haven't had a break and it matters so much and everything inside of you is like geared toward that job, you're going to have parts that are like, done, get me out of here.
Right. So just to give some context, these ideas that you're talking about now, they're rooted in a bigger kind of context, internal family systems therapy. Did you want to say anything about that?
Internal Family Systems was created by Richard Schwartz, and the premise is that we're all multiple, that there is no sort of singular me that composed of many different aspects of ourselves. That's just really adaptive. It's not a sign of pathology or something being wrong with us. And that when we can look at ourselves in terms of having a bunch of different parts that hold different jobs, different memories, energies, fears, hopes, we can start to develop relationships with those parts from inside, and that getting interested in our multiplicity and bringing curiosity in is really similar, or maybe it is the foundation of mental health. Being able to say, yeah, I have a part that just snaps and gets enraged, and being able to turn to that and inquire, like, when does that part come up? What's it believing about the situation? What is it believing about your power or powerlessness? And bringing that kind of inquiry, we've noticed, IFS has noticed that it kind of allows for what we call an unblending, a sort of separating from the reactivity. And in that separation, we have incredible opportunities to, regulate our systems, to speak on behalf of the experience we're having in a way that's not harmful to other people or to ourselves, and to bring in a lot of choice around what we want to do next. It's kind of that gap that gives us a lot of, choice.
And just for listeners, this is not an entirely new concept. This other psychological approaches have worked in this realm, like Gestalt has done things like where you speak to a part of yourself in a chair across from you, or narrative therapy worked with externalizing different parts in order to create that space that you say where choice exists. So IFS is building on that sort of body of knowledge of this idea that when we get a little space from the different parts of ourselves, We get perspective, we get the opportunity for regulation, we get the chance to make more deliberate and intentional choices about who and how we want to be. Well, Amber, you're here with us today to share your motherhood story and how you began to feel like you were not doing enough or being enough. Can you share some about that experience with us?
Yeah. So I will say that I became a mom like very close to 10 years ago. And I thought it was going to be this lovely, magical experience, starting with best birth ever, all the way to like perfect kid. I think like most of us would. So I went into it with like an idealistic kind of thing where I thought, man, I'm going to be so patient. I'm going to be calm. I'm organized, like consistent. I'm always going to be emotionally available. And I'll say, like, if you have emotional attachment wounds with your own caregiving that you've received, that can be a bit of a tricky battle, I think, for most of us. And really just genuinely thought, like, okay, if I just love my kids enough, parenting's going to feel good. Nothing's going to feel too hard. The bad days aren't going to be that bad. But then when you kind of get into it and you're in those sleepless nights initially, and then your kids are growing up and they're testing limits and these boundaries that all kids have to go through, it's their actual job is to test limits. It starts exposing all these places where you felt really inadequate. And so I spent a lot of time, especially with my son, who did testing and is neurodivergent. So he's got ADHD and he also has a gifted IQ. So he's one of those twice exceptional kids. And that will serve him well in the future. And parenting him has been really hard. So I felt like a lot of the time I was working twice as hard to what seemed to come naturally for other people around me, even people with same age kids. I'm like, wow, that looks like a dream. Like, what's it like? Just kind of fantasizing. And then it comes back and becomes interpreted as my own frustration or exhaustion or mistakes that I just wasn't being good enough. My wounds have damaged me too much to be able to adequately parent. And so it was a very long period of time where, like, the more these struggles stacked up, the more self-critical I became. And so it really turned into a pretty big shame spiral for me as I was parenting this neurodivergent kiddo. In that regard, I really had to stop and kind of look back and recognize that, like, the painful part wasn't necessarily the challenges that I had with my kid, because every parent and every mom is going to have different challenges that are unique to their own kids. But it was really believing that a lot of those challenges meant that there was something wrong with me and who I am as a person and who I am as a mom. So it really ended up being more of like this: I'm not just that overwhelmed. I felt really defective in that as I went through that journey and learning that I had a neurodivergent kid.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And also being a parent of a neurodivergent child and two neurotypical children, and spending many years volunteering with NAMI and other groups with special needs kinds of children. The irony of that situation is that the moms of special needs kids work harder than any parent you will ever see, and they get the least positive feedback around that. And they truly are super moms who end up feeling often the worst about their parenting. So my heart really goes out to you around that. And I hope for listeners too, because that is such a common experience. And we'll talk more about some remedies to that as we get into this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, having a neurodivergent kid really makes you start to question assumptions that society has for kids about behavior and learning and emotional regulation and expectations, because they are just so different for those kids.
And as you shared with me before coming on the show, that through parenting your special needs son, you also came to become aware of your own neurodivergence. And I'm wondering, how did that change the way you understood, yourself as a mother or your needs and limits? And what happened, what changed between you and your child when you came to understand that?
Yeah. So as I sort of got suspicious of what was going on with my son, probably around 4, I started recognizing a lot of similar patterns in myself. So I had kind of started questioning, like, boy, do I have this? And started kind of paying closer attention. I'm like, no, maybe I don't. This would have been caught when I was young because I'm a millennial in my young 40s, and most of us, like, that was the time where everybody was getting ADHD handed out to them like candy. So I'm like, for sure would have gotten it if there was an issue. But in testing him, when that came back with the results, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my own testing. So I did that, and I don't have ADHD. I have another type of neurodivergence, which is nonverbal learning disorder. Most people haven't heard of that, but it tends to be a lot of like spatial awareness and communication struggles that now make a lot more sense to me. And so when I realized that, it helped started me kind of thread together, okay, my brain works this way, his brain works this way. I have to approach it from his brain for now, and he can learn how to accommodate other brains later. But it really helped me to realize that a lot of that conflict and struggle that I was having as a mother and a parent of an ADHD kiddo is that it wasn't because it was either of us and we are awful or bad or mismatched or any of that, or that I had to try harder. It was just recognizing these different nervous systems. They're already different, we have different processing styles, and our needs were colliding. And so being able to step back and go, oh, it's not the parenting or my mothering or anything else that's really this piece that isn't working. It's just things are different. And so it really helped me to take a look at things as like I'm not failing as a parent. It was more like it helped me to shift from what's wrong with me to what's happening here, because I was seeing myself as somebody who needed support and understanding, and not just from myself, but from my family members, from colleagues, from friends, from whoever. And so that really kind of opened things up to get that support that I needed.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Debra Sloss. Today, we're exploring motherhood and the myth of not enough, the painful gap between real motherhood and the impossible expectations mothers carry from both outside and within. We've been hearing from psychotherapist Jessica Tomich Sorci about mom parts, and from Reis about parenting a child with significant needs while also coming to understand her own neurodivergence. When we return, we'll hear from McWilliam about motherhood, trauma, shame, and the movement towards self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and ultimately repair. Back to our interview. So Karen, can you also give us a brief version of your motherhood story and what's been most painful or challenging for you to look back on?
Oh, it's a big one. It was really interesting. I was listening to Amber's story, and so much of it really resonated with me. I also have two kiddos. They're quite a bit older now, 22 and 17. My daughter, who's my eldest, she masks her neurodivergence really well and just recently got a diagnosis of ADHD. My son was diagnosed in grade 4 and also had that sort of high functioning component to his ADHD, so didn't really get any, special attention in school. And I think there were parts of me that just forgot it and just didn't really pay attention to it. So I just want to placehold that. But, similarly, I was so looking forward to being a mom. It's all I'd ever wanted. I was working with parents already in the field. I thought I was going to do everything better than my parents had done. I was going to be, so patient and so understanding and so compassionate and so calm and, reasonable and all the things. I had it started with birth. I ended up with my first child, a very traumatic birth, and that took a lot of time to heal from that. But the messaging that it sort of activated something inside my system that was really fixated on failure and not being able to do this right. And I think that really was the seed that grew so much of my mothering journey from that seed, which is a big part of why I do work in birth trauma. I had really wanted a lasting and deep connection with my children. I didn't have that with my own family, with my own parents. I adored my children. I loved them to the ends of the earth, but I really didn't like being a mom. And that surprised me. It shocked me. I felt so much guilt and remorse, my intolerance, my sense of just not good enough. All kinds of little things would trigger me. And while, sleep deprivation and being under-resourced, I was a single mom at different periods of time because my partner, my husband, would travel for long chunks of time. I kept trying to package this into the realm of, well, this is normal. Of course you're exhausted. Of course you can't, manage your emotions. Of course this is really hard. But it felt more than just what everybody else seemed to be going through when they were struggling. And of course, there's always a piece. This was pre-social media, so I didn't have the comparative piece that unfortunately I think a lot of mothers struggle with now when they're on Instagram and trying to see, try to figure out where they sit in relation to other moms. I didn't really have that. But I began to feel that there was something fundamentally wrong with who I was as a person. Like it was really starting to get deeper and deeper. I wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. I didn't have any compassion for myself. And so much of my recollection of mothering was deeply rooted in shame and remorse, self-loathing, depression, like a lot of really, really negative stuff. I focused a lot on those bad mom parts, quote unquote, bad mom parts. They just seemed to overwhelm me. I would dissociate, I would leave, I would shut down, I could go on about that piece. And I was not able at that time to see any of the many different and wonderful ways I could actually mother. And I think this is the piece that will lead into what we're going to talk about shortly with a recent diagnosis, is the lens through which I was experiencing my mothering journey was a different kind of a lens. It wouldn't allow me space to see anything positive. It really kept me enmeshed in the negativity.
As you sort of alluded to later in life, Karen, you came to understand your experience through diagnoses, including post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, and borderline personality disorder. How did understanding that help you make sense of what had been happening for you as you've been describing in your motherhood journey?
It's interesting, Deborah, even as you say that, I can feel my nervous system have an initial gut response to that diagnosis because it's like, ugh. There had been some suggestion that there was a borderline issue a couple of years before I actually got an official diagnosis. And my entire system kind of approached it with like resistance and horror. Like, there's no way, not me, no. Like it just felt so huge to even contemplate accepting that that was part of my experience and what it would mean about me. And then it started to validate every part that ever thought there was something significantly wrong with me. It was like, yeah, there you go. See, that explains it. You are crazy. Like these were the things that I started to hear myself saying to myself. And then lots of therapy, right? Gotta love the therapy. Gotta love IFS. Because I remember when I brought this up to my therapist, she said, oh yeah. Like she just kind of like shrugged. She's like, oh yeah. Yeah, I've known you've got complex PTSD and complex childhood trauma. Like, yeah. Is it helpful to have a diagnosis? I mean, she just sort of took the wind out of the sails of the impact of this. And that was the first sort of moment where I could start to get some separation from it and get really curious about what this actually had meant for me. So I rely a lot on my intellectual parts and the meaning-making parts that really are trying to understand what that meant for me, as opposed to just being blended by it or just enmeshed by it all. So that was a really important sort of shift for me, is leaning into understanding it and getting really curious about what this meant.
Karen, I just can't thank you enough for being willing to talk about this here, because what you're saying is just the most beautiful example of why it's so important to talk about it, because it's just normal people who have these experiences. And, and I mean, what I learned in my work with NAMI is that, borderline personality disorder is highly heritable and often runs in families. And so there's that combination of the trauma because of the illness, and then it perpetuates from generation to generation. And so I just really want to thank you for sharing about this and how important it is for our listeners to hear someone as articulate and thoughtful as you are about your experience, sharing it so openly. And how have you wrestled with the difference in taking responsibility and being overtaken by shame? Because you talked to me a little bit about that coming on, about how that was really important for you, sort of duality.
I think, yeah, I think one of the things that, you just named it, that legacy piece. I'm part of that legacy, right? So yes, I could, look back, and I've done a lot of healing around my own parental wounds and my mother wound and my father wound and the things that was passed on through that legacy. But then, being that sort of seed point at which I also looked at the impact of the behaviors that were a result of how I coped or didn't cope, probably more particularly in motherhood, how that's impacted my own children, right? And so there's that kind of being caught between compassion for my own experience and compassion for my parents and their own experience when they didn't have the resources or capacity or availability of therapy or any of the things that I had access to. And also knowing that it still was going to impact my kids and has impacted my children and what they're going through. So that's the responsibility shame kind of piece, right? I think it gets activated more often when I see my kids struggle because parts orient around it's my fault.
That's every parent's orientation. Yes.
Well, every good parent. I want to say that it's always in quotes, but like my mom didn't have that piece. She didn't she didn't spend time there. She also, I think, was a borderline. And so when I hear you talk about it, Karen, I just have this, I'm just so touched. It's so meaningful to me the way that you work with your parts and the care you take with your own system. That feels like medicine.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That really, I love that. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And I think that the other one, piece I wanted to add, Deborah, around that is that I try to remind the part that wants to carry the blame, right? The blaming part of me, that if I focus solely on that, it undermines all of the wonderful possibilities that show up in my kids, like how awesome and amazing that they are, right? And so loving all of the parts of me and helping to love all the parts of them really is that balm that helps to soothe that responsibility and shame piece. And no amount of sorry or beating myself or belittling myself is going to help that. It's just going to further demand that my kids find their own ways of coping with either trying to caretake me or despise me or some variation of those two, right? So it's really true repair work, trying to be as present as I possibly can with everything that comes up and noticing when that gets activated or triggered within me, and then taking care of that for my own self so that nobody else has to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody else has to do that.
So exciting. It's so exciting hearing that as a child of a mother who really, kind of tortured me and didn't take responsibility for that, so no one else had to do that. That just, yeah, that again, it's medicine. I think that's as good as it gets. None of us are going to do this perfectly. We all feel the weight of it on us as mothers, like because we're so impactful, we really impact our children. And we can't help but be ourselves. And we do bring in what we bring in. It's all here. So what are we going to make of that? That incredible crucible. And I just hear you doing incredible things in that hot space.
Listening to you, I'm just remembering that when I was talking to you before you came on the show, you shared with me how you have really been working on the repair work with your children, and at the same time holding yourself in compassion and love, and how you navigate that tension so beautifully you mentioned on the phone, and I was wondering if you could share some about that with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks. It's not easy work, it's ongoing work. It's noticing every single time that they feel safe enough to share something with me that lands in a hard or painful way, that I notice that and that I don't just immediately go to a place of reactivity or protection or dissociation and take off of their plate that which was never theirs to carry. And that's ongoing work. And I have an example actually, if I can share it, where I had asked my daughter, how would you define our relationship? She's 22 and she's had to go through a lot as any daughter, noting Jessica, right? Being mothered by someone who has borderline. And she shared with me the story, and I think it also illustrates just in terms of my reaction to her, how that landed. So she said, having a mother with borderline personality disorder is like repeatedly putting on a pair of nylon stockings. You have to be slow and careful with it. Nylons tear incredibly easily, and once there's a hole, that point of weakness runs up and down the whole length of the stocking. Every time you put them on, after that point grows and grows, creating more runs and holes and tears until there is very little material left. The thing is, you learn. You learn the best way to put them on and take them off to cause minimal damage, but at the end of the day, they aren't really fixable. You just have to be okay with torn stockings. Growing up with my mom was a lot like that. I learned how to move, talk, behave to cause as little damage as possible. I don't know if the stockings were me or her or our relationship, but no matter how careful I was, tears happen. When I was 15 or 16, I realized that it didn't matter how careful I was. They were never going to magically stitch themselves back up. So I found a weird place of giving up, of peace, of acceptance, and moving on. I felt that I had been grieving my mother my whole life for not being who I needed, and so I decided to let go. I sat in front of my bedroom mirror for what felt like hours, and I hugged myself and I spoke to myself, and I realized that regardless of who I needed, it was who I had. It gave me a weird sense of freedom, I think. I also think it allowed for our relationship to exist. Once I stopped trying to find a way to trick her into being my mom, I had the space to just exist and be me. Now, as I'm older, we can have a new type of relationship, a better one, I think. So to receive that as the mother, like 5 years ago, there was no way I would have been able to hold that kind of description without cascading into a litany of self-loathing, self-blame, not enoughness, too muchness, regret, pain, remorse, depression, blah, 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 right? But I can hold this now with a compassion for her existence, her reality, as well as mine without the need to fix or change. And I can see how beautifully strong and powerful she had to become precisely because of who I was as her mom. And in that, there's like a weird twist, and I hope to be able to get to it, where it's like there is a gratitude despite the challenges and the difficulty and the pain that was caused.
That is just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I'm wondering if the gratitude is somehow related to resilience. It's another thing we want for our children.
Yeah, it's not to be happy all the time. It's to be able to be resilient and manage stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, Jessica, I want to come back to you. When mothers feel like they've hurt their children or fallen short, what mom parts tend to get activated, and how can shame interfere with accountability and self-forgiveness and repair?
Erin has given us such a great lived example of that. And, I think about the difference between what Karen is sharing in terms of her ability to stay present with her daughter's experience and with her own experience in a way that that presence allows for some curiosity and compassion. And in there's like connectedness too. There's actually is relationship because there's interest in the other and space to hold it. With my mom, she could never she could never hear anything that she experienced as criticism. So any part of my experience that implied I'd been hurt in any way she would just drop me like a hot potato with a lot of curse words and, mean things said about who I am. She just was not able to get that space that Karen's got. So I think my hope with introducing IFS into the maternal landscape is that we're giving moms an invitation, permission, and language for doing what Karen is doing. Having this curiosity about how we're being triggered, how we're being activated, the ways in which we feel bad, how our irritation maybe is really showing up because underneath we're afraid that we're not going to be good enough. Not so much that we have a crappy kid. Being able to get curious that way and look at these parts in a paradoxical way, that they're not just straightforward irritation. They're protectors. They're protecting us. They're protecting something vulnerable in us. And we could go looking closer at what's vulnerable. As soon as we do that, like Karen is, we create a lot of space for beholding who we are with a lot more heart and soul and three-dimensionality or multiple dimensionality. And our kids too, we can start to see them clearly and take in their experience. Like Karen's daughter, I can't imagine. I mean, I feel so proud of her. She sounds incredible. Like, even if you had done all the mothering things exactly the way you wish that you could have, I'm not sure you'd have a better result than this, than a daughter who can have that kind of perspective and articulation.
Well, we talked about it afterwards, and she said, no, it just still felt really risky because I just don't know. I just don't know how it's going to show up. And I said, and I don't either. I mean, that's the truth of it, right? It's not something that one controls. When one has significant mental health challenges, it's not a choice.
Right. Thank you for saying that.
And that's, back to that compassion piece. It's like, I did not intend to F up my kids. That was never my intention to go in there with that, right? And so when this, and I'm able to really sit with that, yeah, it wasn't a choice, and she knows that, and I know that, and I can't promise that I'm never going to have an episode that's going to impact her, but I'm doing the work to be much more aware of the likelihood that that's going to start to show up in a, and prepare myself and do what I need to do to care for those parts. And I think Jessica too, I've known you for what, 3 years, I want to say, maybe more, going through the mother-centered approach. And it's been a huge, huge part of my journey and learning and healing. Really, truly has been.
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Debra Sloss. In today's program, we're exploring the impossible expectations so many mothers carry, the painful feelings that can arise when real motherhood does not match the ideal, and how shame can begin to soften when we meet our struggles with curiosity, accountability, and self-compassion. We're joined by psychotherapist and author Jessica Tomich Sorci, along with Amber Reis and Karen McWilliam, who are sharing their lived experiences of motherhood, guilt, healing, and repair. Every State of Mind episode includes a list of helpful resources, and you can find all those mentioned today and more in the show notes at stateofmindmedia.org. Now, let's get back to our interview. Jessica, I want to turn now just to talk about some of those self-sacrificing mom parts, because those are the ones that so often are reinforced by our cultural norms. And I'm wondering if you could just talk some about those particular type parts.
I think the self-sacrificing mom parts are the parts of us that are really trying to keep it together and hit all the marks and come through for our kids and for our communities and our families and look good doing it. And so they're doing the controlling and the minimizing of our own needs, and they're being superwoman. And while all of that is pretty remarkable and commendable, it's also self-sacrificing. So what happens to ourselves? Where do ourselves go? Where do our needs go? Our own unfinished business, the wounds we brought in, the hungers we have, our sexuality, sensuality, artistry, need to explore, think, adventure, rest. All of that really gets paused. And I think the fact that so many moms do that so much of the time is worth us taking a moment to revere, not just appreciate, but revere. What we're doing for our species is enormous. We're creating nervous systems, we're growing the beings that will inhabit our planet. And we're doing that through the donation of our own energy and focus while we pause our existence in a sense. And I don't know, that always touches me. When I think about my experience of that, it was profound. I had a lot to say and work through that I had to put on hold, and a lot to express that I had to put on hold till my kids got older. And I know that's true for so many incredible women. Our ability to do that, to pause ourselves and care for others, I think makes us phenomenal leaders. And I think we should be in many more leadership positions because we're able to do what Karen and Amber are demonstrating here, take care of someone else while noticing and caring for ourselves in a way that's so complex and sophisticated and healthy.
Shout it from the rooftops.
I'm down with that. Amber and Karen, I'd like to ask both of you this question as moms. As you listen to Jessica describe different mom parts, are there one or two that feel especially important in understanding your experience as a mother? And what did that part sound like for you? What did you think it was trying to protect for you or do for you? So Amber, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think that, a couple of parts show up pretty strongly for me in my experience. Like the first part that I think of outside of like the anger and the inner critic that we've already kind of talked about is that fixer, like, and that belief that I can fix and solve every problem if I just worked harder, knew the right person, had the right medicine, had all the right stuff. And I mean, I can tell you this part is exhausting, because she's always got me constantly scanning for what I need to improve. How can I protect my kids from any pain and from me feeling that sense of helplessness as a mother? And that one kind of being held up with that inner critic and that anger part about like, oh, you've got to be more patient, more organized and grateful. And so that inner critic really telling you, ignore how this anger part wants you to feel and think and do. Like, that's not okay. And like the constant criticism of my mothering to that I thought would help me to mother better or differently. And just noticing like that part really trying to help me to protect from that judgment and rejection that I was giving to myself. Like, because both parts were really trying to protect me in the ways that they know how, right? Like, my fixer for sure trying to make sure that like I don't repeat that pattern that my folks gave down to me. I don't want that to be a thing. So if I just do everything perfectly. Oh, that even on the days like this part can get noisy, like the inner critic and fixer. Like even on the days where I'm like, well, that was pretty good. Like they're always popping up and like, well, you could do this better if you would have just noticed this first. Like this would have gone even better. Like maybe there would have been no arguing between your kids today, or you would have stopped all the fights, or like whatever the case might be. But just kind of noticing that those parts were really prominent. It was really helpful for me because now I can acknowledge them when they come up and not if, it's when, because they don't just go away. They're still scared of all those same things. And so being able to go, you know what? I can't solve every problem for them. My kids are going to have to go and fail their way through life the same way that I did, because that's what makes it enriching. And that's just letting my parts know, this fixer part, that they're not going to get screwed up if I yell one time, or a kid hurts their feelings, or a critic telling me that I need to do better next time and judge myself harshly the way that maybe I heard my own mother judge me with my own reactions. So just letting this inner critic know too that like it's okay, like that I messed up. Like, and I'm really glad that you're letting me know that there's something that we can work on, but maybe we need to find some kinder words.
And Karen, what about you? Are there one or two mom parts from Jessica's description that feel especially important in understanding your own parenting journey? And what did that part sound like? And what do you think it was trying to protect for you?
Well, I've talked already about anger, I think, and rage and that kind of thing. I think I got the two that come to mind that um, are resentment and catastrophizing parts. I don't even know if that's a word, but that's how I describe it. Resentment is, why do I have to do this? I shouldn't have to do this. It's not fair. I'm never going to have time for me again. I'm missing out on all the fun things. I'm not going to get my needs met. And I fought a lot. The inner critic comes in, it criticizes the fact that the resentment is there, and that just this whole, spiraling of, where I'm trying to figure out how is this actually helping, and then, coming to the understanding of just how much my needs aren't being met, softening into that, like, and really feeling into just how much of my sense of self was really getting lost in all of this, and that appreciation. But I think more recently, what I struggle with is the catastrophizing parts, the parts that are really, really, really worried about something bad happening to my 17-year-old and what his experience is like and what that could mean for the future. And so they tend to spiral. And catastrophizing part is it's like an offshoot of anxiety. Right. And I know enough about anxiety in this part that it's really trying to do a lot of double time trying to protect and prevent and prevent and protect and protect and prevent. Just constant. And if I can just do that enough, everything will be okay, which of course it isn't. And so, yeah, just softening into that, understanding why it's trying to not only protect my kiddos, but myself, with the underpinning story around if they're okay, then I'm okay. And it's that constant teasing out that it is not actually connected, that my being okay has nothing to do with them, or them being okay has nothing to do with me. And so that's that inner teasing out of those two pieces.
Now, I just want to talk a little bit about resources. We always like to make sure that our listeners can learn more and go deeper with the topic that we've talked about. So, Jessica, are there any resources, one or two, that you'd want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think the idea that you could make yourself more important than your children at times and bring a lot of curiosity into what's happening for you, especially when you're triggered or activated. And you can also check out the Mom Parts community online, where there's just a ton of conversations and interactions and details and information about Mom Parts, and that's momparts.com.
So, Amber, knowing what you now understand about your child's needs and your own neurodivergence and needs, what would you want to say to another mother who's parenting a child with special needs and who may be feeling overwhelmed or isolated or not enough themselves?
Yeah. Okay. So just to remind yourself, you don't have to be a perfect mother to be exactly the mother that your kiddo really needs you to be. 'Cause there's something that's really just great about the fact that your kid ended up with you. Not the perfect mom, but your kid's mom, the one who keeps showing up and learning and loving on them and offering repair. And, especially for that neurodivergent piece, like for yourself, being able to have like a friend or somebody that you can call that also has another neurodivergent kid, just to say like, "Oh, this is what the ADHD was doing today. Like, I just need you to hear me," and somebody on the other line to say, "Yeah, oh, I get it. I've totally been there." Having that can just bring such instant relief to know that you're not the only one who's had that challenging experience.
Jessica, what's one thing that you would most want mothers to remember when they feel like they're failing?
If you want to get better at mothering, get better at loving yourself.
You've been listening to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 Today, we've heard that painful feelings in motherhood do not mean a mother is bad. They often point to parts of us that are overwhelmed, protective, wounded, or trying desperately to do right by our children. We've also heard how cultural expectations of the good mother can become internal voices of guilt, shame, and self-criticism. But when mothers begin to recognize those voices as parts of themselves, rather than the whole of who they are, something can soften, and a new space for compassion, accountability, repair, connection, healing, and even joy can open. I want to say a huge thank you to our guests, Jessica Tomich Sorci, Amber Reis, and Karen McWilliam, for bringing such honesty, wisdom, and compassion to this conversation. And thanks to you for joining us. Every State of Mind episode includes a list of helpful resources, and you can find those mentioned today and more along with our full archive at stateofmindmedia.org. If you found today's show meaningful, you may also enjoy episode 50, Postpartum Depression and Anxiety, episode 71, Special Needs, Special Education, What Every Parent Should Know, and episode 73, Difficult Mothering of Adult Children with Substance Use and Mental Health Challenges. New episodes of State of Mind are released the first Sunday of every month. Stay connected between episodes by following State of Mind on Facebook or Instagram at stateofmind.radio and podcast, where we share visual resources and reflections that build on these conversations. If this episode spoke to you, could you please take a moment to rate and review the show? Your feedback helps others find these conversations and the support they may need. We'd also love to hear from you. You can share your story by submitting an in your voice recording. Call in or send in a short audio clip right from your phone. Your voice may be featured in a future episode. Details are at stateofmindmedia.org. Special thanks to our team, Austin Gautreau and Marcella Morton for audio production, Evelyn Campbell for community coordination, Patrice Vecchione for story coaching, Loan Tran for content distribution, Nika Naik for transcriptions, Priscilla Yee and Grishma Jain for graphic design, Melanie Dominguez and Sarah Eisenberg for research, and thanks to musician Adrian Legg and Favored Nations Entertainment for our theme music. State of Mind was developed and originally broadcast in association with KSQD-FM in Santa Cruz, California. Join us again next month for a whole new episode of State of Mind. Until then, live well.